The second challenge took place on the frozen continent, where the temperature was cold enough to turn most liquids into solid ice within seconds. The wind blew so hard it could knock down trees, and the ground was covered with ice so slick that walking normally was almost impossible. Each fighter had to climb a wall of pure ice that rose straight up for 3 kilometers into the sky, but climbing the wall was not the only danger. Robotic defenders had been placed at different levels to attack anyone trying to reach the top. These machines shot beams of freezing energy that could turn a living creature into a block of ice instantly. They also fired sharp spears made of ice that could punch through most types of armor. The Zephyrian warrior started his climb by using his massive fists to punch handholds into the ice wall. His natural armor protected him from the worst effects of the cold, and he could deflect the ice spears with his thick skin. The robot attack slowed him down but could not stop his steady progress upward. Nala, the Vorthan fighter, used her incredible speed to dodge between the defensive attacks. She moved so fast that the robots could barely track her position before she had already moved somewhere else. Her strategy was to climb quickly during the brief moments when the machines were reloading their weapons. Other competitors used various natural abilities to survive the challenge. Some had thick fur that kept them warm, others could stick to ice like insects walking on glass. Several fighters had ways of detecting the robot attacks before they happened so they could find cover in time. Kyung approached the ice wall differently than anyone expected. Instead of looking for the fastest or safest route to the top, he spent several minutes just watching the defensive systems. The robots followed patterns when they attacked, and Kyung seemed to be memorizing every detail of how they moved. When he finally began climbing, he did not go straight up the wall like the other fighters. Instead, he moved sideways along cracks and ledges that seemed too narrow for anyone to use. His bare feet somehow found grip on ice that should have been too slippery to walk on. The watching crowd grew quiet as they realized what the human was doing. He was not just avoiding the robot attacks. He was moving through spaces where the defensive systems could not reach him. The machines had been programmed to guard the most obvious climbing routes, but Kyung was using paths that the tournament designers never expected anyone to find. More impossible than his route was the fact that his feet showed no signs of damage from the freezing ice. Normal human feet should have gotten frostbite and turned black within minutes of touching such cold surfaces, but Kyung's feet looked completely normal, like he was walking on warm ground instead of deadly ice. His body was adapting again, just like it had in the poison swamp. His blood flow increased to keep his hands and feet warm. His skin developed better protection against the cold. His balance adjusted to the slippery surface as if he had been walking on ice his entire life. The changes were subtle, but they were definitely real. Halfway up the wall, a massive storm hit the mountain with winds strong enough to tear apart most buildings. The other competitors found sheltered spots and waited for the weather to pass. The flying ice and snow made climbing impossible for anyone who valued their life, but Kyung did something that made even the tournament officials question what they were seeing. He spread his arms wide and leaned into the hurricane-force wind. Instead of fighting against the storm, he seemed to be using it. The powerful air currents lifted him up the mountain face faster than climbing ever could. He moved through the storm like he was surfing on invisible waves. His body position changed constantly to catch different wind currents and maintain control. Even when ice chunks the size of houses flew past him, he adjusted his position just enough to avoid being hit. The alien spectators watched in stunned silence as the human rode the storm like it was a gentle breeze. Several species that had considered themselves masters of environmental adaptation realized they had never seen anything like what Kyung was doing. He was not just surviving in the hostile conditions, he was using them to his advantage. When the storm finally ended, Kyung was already sitting calmly at the summit waiting for the other fighters to finish their climb. He had completed in 1 hour what was designed to take most competitors at least 6 hours. The crowd was no longer laughing at the strange human. Instead, they were leaning forward in their seats, trying to understand what kind of creature could do such impossible things. Nala finished second and immediately approached Kyung at the top of the ice wall. She had won 17 previous tournaments for her species and considered herself one of the greatest fighters in galactic history, but she had never seen anyone move through a deadly environment with such perfect control. She studied Kyung carefully before speaking in the broken galactic common language that most species used to communicate with each other. "You are not what you appear to be," she said slowly. "What are you really?" Kyung smiled and touched the small device attached to his belt. For just a moment, his expression became very serious, like he was remembering something terrible. "Just a man who learned that sometimes the best way to fight is not to fight at all," he replied. "But if I must fight," he did not finish the sentence, but his eyes grew distant and cold. Nala took an involuntary step backward. In that brief moment, she had seen something in the human's face that frightened her more than any opponent she had ever encountered. It was not anger or hatred, it was the look of someone who knew exactly how much destruction he could cause and chose not to cause it, the look of someone who carried the power to end everything and used that power to protect instead of destroy. As they prepared to return to the arena for the next phase of the tournament, Nala found herself wondering what would happen if this quiet barefoot human ever decided that fighting was necessary. What kind of monster would emerge from behind those calm eyes and that gentle smile? She decided she never wanted to find out. The device on Kyung's belt suddenly seemed much more important than a simple communication tool, and the way he tested it every day took on a completely different meaning. Maybe it was not insurance against losing. Maybe it was insurance against winning too completely. The other competitors were starting to look at Kyung with a mixture of respect and fear. They had all assumed that humans were weak because they looked fragile and moved slowly. But this human was proving that appearances could be very deceiving. Indeed, he might be the most dangerous fighter in the entire tournament, precisely because he looked so harmless. As the sun set over the frozen mountains, Kyung sat alone, testing his device one more time. The soft beep it made seemed to echo longer than usual in the cold air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to show what humans were really capable of. But tonight he just sat quietly and remembered all the reasons why he hoped he would never have to use the terrible thing he carried. The tournament world looked like someone had taken pieces from a dozen different nightmare planets and stuck them together. The northern continent was covered in ice so cold it could freeze blood inside a living body. The southern lands were burning deserts where the sand could melt metal. The eastern shores had poisonous swamps that killed anything that breathed the air. And in the western mountains, volcanoes shot liquid fire into the sky every few minutes. In the center of all this deadly landscape stood a massive arena made from black stone that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. Thousands of alien creatures filled the seats, waiting to watch the primitive humans get torn apart by real warriors. The arena had screens floating in the air that would show the battles to spectators who wanted to see every detail of the violence. Opening ceremony was designed to scare any fighter who was not already terrified. Each species presented their champion with loud music and flashing lights and demonstrations of power that made the ground shake. The Zephyrian warrior was introduced first, and he roared so loudly that several smaller aliens covered their hearing organs with their appendages. Then he picked up a boulder the size of a small car and crushed it to powder with his bare hands. The Vorthan fighter called. Nala was next, and she moved so fast around the arena that she looked like a ghost made of motion. She ran up the walls and across the ceiling and back down to the floor in less than 3 seconds. The crowd made excited noises as their translators tried to keep up with all the different languages being spoken at once. The mollusk shapeshifter, whose name was Blix, demonstrated its abilities by changing into perfect copies of several different species in the audience. It became a Zephyrian warrior, then a Vorthan speed fighter, then something that looked like a giant insect with razor-sharp claws. Each transformation took only seconds and looked completely real. When humanity's turn came, the arena fell silent as Kyung walked onto the stage. He wore the same simple cloth pants and shirt he had been wearing since leaving Earth. His feet were still bare, and he carried nothing in his hands. The crowd began making sounds that the translators turned into laughter. Several alien commentators started making jokes about humans sending a farmer to fight instead of a warrior. The other champions looked at Kyung with expressions that might have been confusion or pity. The Zephyrian warrior seemed genuinely puzzled about why such a weak-looking creature was even allowed in the tournament. Nala tilted her head like she was trying to solve a puzzle that did not make sense. Blix simply stared. Without changing its current form, the first challenge was announced as survival in the poison swamps. Each fighter would be dropped alone into the toxic wasteland on the eastern continent. They had to reach the center of the swamp and take a glowing crystal from a pedestal, then return to the starting point alive. The swamp air burned the lungs of most species, and the water could dissolve flesh in minutes. Most alien species had natural defenses against poison or could hold their breath for hours at a time. Some could filter toxins through special organs or change their body chemistry to resist damage. Humans had no such advantages. Everyone expected Kyung to die within the first few minutes of breathing. The deadly air transport ships carried each fighter to different parts of the swamp so they could not help each other or follow the same path. The moment Kyung's ship opened its doors, the poisonous mist rolled inside, and he took his first breath of air that should have killed him instantly. Instead, something impossible began to happen. Kyung's breathing became very slow and shallow, like he was using as little air as possible. His skin developed a thin layer that seemed to protect him from the worst effects of the poison. His eyes adjusted to see clearly through the green mist that surrounded everything. The changes were subtle, but they were definitely real. As Kyung walked deeper into the swamp, he moved like someone who had spent his whole life in deadly environments. He tested each step before putting his full weight down. He avoided patches of ground that looked solid, but were actually pools of acid covered with a thin crust. He found safe paths through areas where other fighters would have been lost or killed. The floating screens in the arena showed Kyung making steady progress toward the center of the swamp, while other competitors struggled with the hostile environment. The Zephyrian warrior was using his armor plating to resist the poison, but even his tough skin was starting to show damage. Nala was moving fast enough to avoid breathing much of the toxic air, but she was getting tired from the constant speed. When Kyung reached the center of the swamp, he found the glowing crystal sitting on a metal pedestal surrounded by the worst concentration of poisonous gas, but he also found something else that changed everything. Blix the mollusk shapeshifter had fallen into a pool of acid and was dissolving slowly while making sounds of pain. That needed no translation. For a moment, Kyung stood at the edge of the acid pool looking down at his competitor. The smart thing to do would be to take the crystal and leave. Blix was an enemy in this tournament, and saving the alien would not help Kyung win anything, but instead of walking away, Kyung did something that shocked everyone watching. He jumped into the acid pool and grabbed Blix with his bare hands. The acid immediately began burning through Kyung's clothes and eating at his skin, but he ignored the pain and pulled the mollusk to safety. The alien was badly hurt, but still alive thanks to the human's actions. This act of mercy confused every creature watching the tournament. In a competition where only one species could win everything, why would anyone risk their life to save an enemy? It made no sense according to any logic that the galactic species understood. The crowd fell silent as they tried to process what they had just seen. Blix looked up at Kyung with large eyes that showed something between gratitude and bewilderment. The shapeshifter tried to change form to communicate, but was too injured to complete the transformation. Instead, it just made a sound that seemed to mean thank you in whatever language mollusk used when they were too hurt to speak properly. Kyung picked up the crystal and helped Blix walk back toward the starting point, moving slowly so the injured alien could keep up. They finished the challenge together, with Kyung in second place behind Nala, who had used her speed to complete the course quickly. But everyone was talking about the human who saved his enemy instead of the Vorthan who won. Something had changed in the tournament's atmosphere. For the first time, spectators were not just watching for violence and death. They were curious about this strange barefoot creature from Earth who would risk his own life to help someone who was supposed to be his enemy. The other competitors were looking at Kyung differently, too, like they were trying to figure out what kind of being would choose mercy over victory. As the fighters returned to their quarters to prepare for the next challenge, Kyung quietly tested his small device again. The soft beep it made seemed louder than usual in the silence that followed the day's events. Whatever that device was, everyone was starting to realize it might be more important than anyone had guessed. Captain Jiwan stood on the metal floor of humanity's first real spaceship and stared at the message that had just arrived from somewhere deep in space. The words glowed on the screen in front of him, but he had to read them 3 times before he believed what they said. The galaxy was inviting Earth to join something called the Grand Tournament. Every Species in the known universe sent their best fighter to compete in brutal battles. Across different worlds, the winner would get control of 3 entire star systems for 1,000 years. That was more wealth and power than humanity had ever dreamed of having. But as Jiwan read the message again, he realized something that made his stomach feel cold. The aliens were not inviting humans because they thought Earth was strong. They were inviting humans because they thought it would be funny to watch them lose. Message was written in a way that seemed polite, but Jiwan could see the insults hidden in every line. The alien council called humans a newly discovered primitive species. They said Earth might provide some entertainment before the real fighting began. They even suggested that humans should send their strongest creature since they probably did not understand the difference between intelligence and physical power. Jiwan felt his face getting hot with anger. How dare these alien creatures look down on humanity like they were animals in a zoo? But then he thought about what this tournament could mean for Earth. If somehow a human fighter could win even 1 or 2 matches, it would prove that his species deserved respect in the galaxy. And if by some miracle they could actually win the whole thing, 3 star systems full of planets and resources and technology, beyond anything Earth had ever seen. The rules of the tournament were simple but harsh. No weapons except what a fighter was born with. No changes to the body using technology or science. No armor or protective clothing. Each warrior would face challenges designed to test every kind of fighting skill and survival ability. The battles would take place on a world created just for the tournament, with different environments that could kill a fighter in dozens of different ways. Most alien species had been preparing for this tournament for decades. They had billions of creatures to choose from, and ways of training that humans could not even imagine. Some species could change their body shape at will. Others had skin harder than steel, or could move faster than bullets. Earth had exactly 3 days to pick someone to represent the entire human race. Jiwan called an emergency meeting with every important person he could reach. The military leaders wanted to send Colonel Park, who could bench press a small car and had won every fighting competition on Earth. The scientists argued for Dr. Kim, who had the highest intelligence test scores in human history and could solve problems faster than computers. Politicians spent hours debating about who would make Earth look best to the alien audience. But while all these important people argued, Jiwan kept thinking about a story he had heard from his friend in the military intelligence division. There was a man living alone in the mountains of Korea, a former soldier who had been quietly discharged after some kind of incident that nobody would talk about officially. The man was considered strange by everyone who knew him. He walked everywhere without shoes, even when snow covered the ground. He never carried weapons or wore protective gear. Some people called him crazy. Others whispered that he was something much more dangerous. Private Kyung had served in Earth's final war, the conflict that almost destroyed the planet before humanity learned to travel between stars. During that war, terrible weapons had been used and terrible choices had been made. Most of the records were still classified, but Jiwan had heard rumors about a secret project called the Silence Protocol, something so frightening that even the generals who ordered it refused to talk about what it really was. Jiwan made his decision without asking permission from anyone else. He took a small transport ship and flew to the mountains where Kyung lived. The journey took 6 hours through clouds and over forests that seemed to go on forever. Finally, he found a tiny wooden cabin sitting alone on a hillside with smoke coming from its chimney. When Jiwan landed his ship and walked to the cabin door, he found Kyung outside chopping wood for his fire. The man looked exactly like the photos in his military file except for his eyes. Those eyes seemed to see everything at once, like he was watching for dangers that normal people could not even imagine. Kyung was not tall or muscular like the fighters the military wanted to send. He was average height with a thin build and hands that looked more suited for fixing things than breaking them. His feet were bare despite the cold mountain air, and his clothes were simple cloth pants and a shirt that had been repaired many times. He wore a small metal device on his belt that looked like an old radio from decades ago. What surprised Jiwan most was that King seemed to know why he had come before any words were spoken. The former soldier looked up from his wood chopping, nodded once, and said he would pack his things. He owned almost nothing besides his simple clothes and the mysterious device. When Jiwan asked about the metal object, Kyung smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes and called it his insurance policy. The Journey to the tournament world took 2 weeks flying through space at speeds that made normal humans sick. But Kyung spent most of the trip sitting quietly in his small room. On the ship, he would meditate for hours or stare out the window at the stars. He never asked questions about the aliens he would fight. He never requested special training or better equipment. The only thing he did every day was test his small device. By pressing a button that made it beep softly, other species arrived at the tournament in massive ships that looked like floating cities. Their champions were surrounded by teams of doctors and advisors and specialists who carried equipment that human science could not understand. The Zephyrian warrior stood 3 meters tall with natural armor covering his entire body. The Vorthan fighter moved so fast that she appeared as just a blur when she ran. The mollusk representative could change its body into any shape it needed for fighting. Every alien champion looked like they had been designed specifically for winning battles. Humanity sent one quiet man who walked around without shoes and carried what looked like broken communication equipment. When other species saw Kyung walking through the tournament facility, they pointed and made sounds that their translators turned into laughter. Several alien news reporters interviewed each other about how quickly the human would be eliminated from the competition. Some betting organizations refused to take wagers on Kyung lasting more than 5 minutes in his first challenge, but there was something about the way Kyung moved that made a few observers pause and look more carefully. He walked like every step was planned perfectly. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, but not like someone who was nervous or afraid, more like someone who was measuring distances and calculating angles and planning for problems that had not happened yet. The night before the tournament began, Jiwon found Kyung sitting alone on the observation deck of their ship, looking out at the alien world where the battles would take place. Tomorrow this quiet man would face creatures that could tear through metal with their bare hands, or move faster than bullets, or survive in environments that would kill humans in seconds. Jiwon wanted to ask if Kyung was ready, if he understood what he was facing, if he had any chance at all of surviving. But when he looked at the former soldier's calm expression and saw him testing his small device one more time, Jiwon realized that maybe he was asking the wrong questions. Maybe the question was not whether Kyung could survive fighting the alien champions. Maybe the question was whether the alien champions could survive fighting him. The third challenge was what everyone had been waiting for since the tournament began: pure hand-to-hand combat in a circular arena, with only one rule: that fighters could not kill each other. Everything else was allowed, including techniques that caused unconsciousness, serious injury, or forced surrender. This was where the real warriors would be separated from the pretenders. King's first opponent was a crystalline fighter whose entire body was made of living diamond. The creature stood 4 meters tall and weighed as much as a small vehicle. Its skin could not be cut by any known material, and it could reshape its arms and legs into hammers, swords, or shields. One punch from a crystalline warrior could shatter steel plates like they were made of glass. The crowd expected this fight to last about 10 seconds. A soft, fleshy human against living diamonds seemed like the most unfair match possible. Even the other competitors watched with mild interest, assuming they were about to see humanity eliminated from the tournament in the most obvious way imaginable. The betting organizations had stopped taking wagers on how quickly Kyung would lose. Instead, they were taking bets on what pieces of him would be left after the crystalline warrior finished its attack. Most aliens thought the human would be reduced to a red stain on the arena floor. When the fight began, the crystalline charged forward with its right arm transformed into a massive warhammer. The weapon was larger than Kyung's entire body and moving fast enough to crush a tank. The sound it made cutting through the air was like thunder. The blow would have turned any normal creature into paste, but when the diamond hammer reached the spot where Kyung had been standing, the human was no longer there. He had not moved quickly like Nala the speed fighter. He had not jumped high or rolled away like an acrobat. He had simply stepped slightly to one side, but with such perfect timing that the massive attack missed him by less than the width of a hair. The crystalline's momentum carried it forward, and it stumbled slightly, trying to stop its charge. In that moment of imbalance, Kyung moved. He reached out with just one finger and touched a specific point on the diamond warrior's back. The touch was so gentle it would not have hurt an insect, The crystalline warrior immediately collapsed. Its entire body went completely rigid, like someone had turned off a switch. The creature was still conscious and could move its eyes, but everything else was paralyzed. The fight was over in less than 5 seconds. The silence in the arena was so complete that individual heartbeats could be heard from the spectators. Then the noise began. Thousands of aliens started making sounds of confusion and disbelief. Tournament officials rushed onto the arena floor, demanding to know what technique Kyung had used. Medical teams swarmed around the paralyzed crystalline, running every test they could think of. They found no injury, no poison, no sign of any technology being used. The Diamond Warrior was completely healthy except for the fact that it could not move. They could detect no reason for the paralysis. Competitors from other species accused Kyung of cheating. They claimed he must be using hidden weapons or illegal body modifications. Some suggested that humans had secretly developed advanced technology that could not be detected by normal methods. The accusations grew louder and more angry. Kyung calmly explained that all living creatures, including those made of crystal, had energy flowing through their bodies. If you knew exactly where and how to touch, you could disrupt that energy flow temporarily. The crystalline would recover completely in a few hours, with no permanent damage done. But the alien doctors and scientists found no evidence of energy manipulation. Their most advanced instruments could detect no trace of what Kyung claimed to have done. The paralysis seemed to have no physical cause, yet it was completely real and undeniable. Some spectators began whispering that the human was using some kind of space magic. Others claimed he must be secretly a member of a more advanced species who was disguising himself as a primitive human. A few suggested that Earth had been hiding its true technological capabilities for decades. The second combat match was even more shocking because Nala, the Vorthan speed fighter, had specifically requested to face Kyung. She wanted to test her theory about what the human really was. This fight would be different because Nala was fast enough to attack from multiple directions at the same time, too quick for the timing tricks that had worked against the slower crystalline. The fight began with Nala becoming a blur of motion. She attacked from 12 different angles in the space of 2 seconds, moving faster than most eyes could follow. Her claws struck at Kyung's head, chest, arms, and legs all simultaneously. Normal reflexes could never react to such speed, but somehow Kyung was not where any of the attacks landed. He moved like he knew where she would strike before she had decided to strike there. Every dodge was perfect. Every step took him just far enough to avoid her claws. Every movement seemed planned in advance. After 30 seconds of impossible dodging, Nala stopped attacking and stood still, breathing heavily from the effort. She stared at Kyung with confusion and growing fear. How she demanded, "How do you know where I will move before I know myself?" Kyung's answer sent chills through everyone who heard it. "I can see the lines," he said simply. "Every living thing has lines of force, paths of movement, centers of balance. You are very fast, but you still follow the laws of physics. Once I see your line, speed does not matter." To prove his point, Kyung began walking slowly toward Nala. She tried to move, to use her incredible speed to escape or counterattack. But every path she chose, Kyung was already blocking. Every escape route was cut off before she could take it. Her speed meant nothing if someone could predict exactly where she would go. Within seconds, Nala found herself trapped in the center of the arena with nowhere to run. The human had moved at normal walking speed, but had somehow cornered the fastest fighter in galactic history. She realized with growing horror that Kyung could have struck her at any moment during the chase. Instead of attacking the helpless Vorthan, Kyung bowed respectfully and stepped back. "I surrender this match to you," he announced clearly. "You fought with honor and skill. I have no need to prove dominance over a worthy opponent." The crowd erupted in chaos. Kyung had obviously won the fight, but was giving victory to his opponent. This had never happened in tournament history. Officials argued about what rules applied when a winner voluntarily surrendered. Eventually, they declared the match a draw and allowed both fighters to advance. As they left the arena together, Nala caught up with Kyung and walked beside him. "Why did you surrender?" she asked quietly. "You had clearly defeated me." Kyung touched his small device, and for a moment his expression became very dark. "Because this is not a real fight," he replied. "In a real fight, I would not stop at paralysis or surrender. I would use this, and everyone in this arena would be dead in 30 seconds. Including myself, Nala looked at the small metal object with new understanding. It was not a communication device or a piece of simple equipment. It was a weapon, something so terrible that even carrying it changed the person who possessed it. She realized that Kyung had not been showing mercy to his opponents. He had been protecting them from something much worse than losing a tournament. The human fighter was not just representing his species in a competition, he was serving as a walking reminder that some powers were too dangerous to use except in the most desperate circumstances and the calm way. He carried that responsibility. Was perhaps the most frightening thing of all. As they walked back to their quarters, Kyung tested his device once more. The soft beep seemed louder than usual in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the tournament facility. Everyone was beginning to understand that they were not just watching fights anymore. They were witnessing something that might change how the entire galaxy thought about power and the choice of when to use it. The fourth challenge was designed to be the cruelest test of all. Instead of testing physical abilities or fighting skills, it would attack the mind. Each remaining competitor had to face their greatest fear in a virtual reality simulation created by the most advanced alien technology in the galaxy. System worked by connecting directly to a fighter's brain and reading their deepest memories. The computers would find whatever terrified them most, then create a perfect simulation of that fear. The experience felt completely real, and most competitors came out of the test screaming or crying or completely broken mentally. The crystalline warrior faced simulations of acid that could dissolve his diamond body, something that was impossible in real life but felt completely real in the virtual world. The mollusk shapeshifter Blix confronted scenarios where it was trapped in one permanent form and could never change again. Other fighters battled against fears of death, failure, losing their families, or being forgotten by history. When the alien technicians prepared to connect Kyung to the simulation system, several of them seemed nervous. They had heard about his previous performances in the tournament and wondered what kind of fears would be hidden in the mind of someone so unusual. The moment they activated the connection to Kyung's brain, alarms began screaming throughout the entire facility. Red warning lights flashed and emergency systems activated automatically. Several alien technicians collapsed with blood streaming from their sensory organs. The quantum computers running the virtual reality began overheating so badly that smoke poured from their cooling systems. Disconnect him, the head technician screamed in panic. Disconnect him right now before the whole system explodes. But it was already too late. The simulation computers had scanned Kyung's mind and were trying to create his greatest fear. What they found there was not something that could be safely simulated. The machines were not powerful enough to contain the horror that lived in the human's memories. Emergency shutdown procedures activated, cutting power to the entire virtual reality network. In the sudden silence that followed, everyone stared at Kyung, who sat completely calm in the connection chair as if nothing unusual had happened. He was not sweating or shaking like other competitors who had faced their fears. He looked exactly the same as always. "What did you see in there?" asked Dr. Yuna, the tournament's chief medical officer. She was also from Earth but had left the planet decades ago to study alien psychology. She recognized something familiar and terrifying in Kyung's expression. "The same thing I see every day," Kyung replied quietly. "The memory of what I did during the war on Earth, the day I earned this device and learned why I should never use it again." Dr. Yuna's face went pale. She had heard whispers about Earth's final war, the conflict that had nearly destroyed the entire planet before humanity developed space travel. There had been rumors about a secret weapon, something so terrible that all records of it were classified at the highest government levels. "You were part of the silence protocol," she whispered. Kyung nodded slowly. "I was the silence protocol, one man, one device, one choice that ended a war and killed." He stopped speaking and stared down at his hands as if he could still see blood on them. "The exact number is classified, but it was too many." The small device on his belt was not a communication tool or a piece of simple equipment. It was a quantum destabilizer capable of breaking apart the molecular bonds that held organic matter together. One press of the button would kill every living thing within a 30-kilometer radius instantly and completely painlessly. It was the ultimate weapon designed to end conflicts by making the cost of continuing them too terrible to bear. Kyung was the only person trusted to carry it, because he was also the only person who absolutely refused to use it. His job was not to threaten enemies, but to serve as a reminder of what would happen if they pushed humanity too. Farwai, do you still carry it? Dr. Yuna asked with growing horror, because sometimes the only way to ensure peace is to carry the means of total war. Kyung replied, as long as I have this device, no enemy will push humanity to the point where we have no choice but to use it. They know that if they threaten Earth's existence, one man will walk to their homeworlds and end everything, including himself. The truth about Kyung spread through the tournament facility like wildfire. He was not just representing humanity in a competition, he was serving as humanity's final guardian. If any species tried to destroy Earth or enslave its people, they would not face armies or space fleets. They would face one quiet man walking barefoot toward their worlds with a device that could sterilize entire planets. The other competitors began looking at him with a mixture of respect and terror. The crystalline warrior approached Kyung with something that resembled the way his people honored their greatest heroes. Nala bowed formally, using the Vorthan tradition for acknowledging a superior warrior. Even Blix changed into a shape that indicated deep respect in mollusk culture tournament. Officials became nervous around the human who carried Doomsday in his pocket. They realized that every moment of the competition had been taking place under the shadow of a weapon that could kill everyone present. Several alien species quietly contacted their home governments to make sure they had never done anything that might be considered threatening to Earth, but Kyung remained exactly the same as he had always been. He still walked barefoot through the facility. He still moved with calm precision and gentle manners. He still helped injured competitors and showed kindness to anyone who needed it. The knowledge that he could kill everyone around him had not made him cruel or arrogant. If anything, carrying such terrible responsibility had made him more careful about every action he took. He understood better than anyone else that power without restraint led to destruction, so he chose to show restraint in everything he did as a way of proving that having ultimate power did not mean you had to use it. Dr. Yuna watched Kyung testing his device that evening and realized something that made her feel sick. The man was not just carrying a weapon that could end civilizations, he was carrying the burden of knowing that someday he might have to use it. If humanity ever faced complete extinction, one man would have to make the choice to take millions of other lives to save his own species, and after making that choice, he would have to live with the memory of it for the rest of his life, assuming he survived the experience at all. Most versions of the quantum destabilizer killed the person who activated them along with everything else in the area. It was designed to be a final option when no other choice remained. As night fell over the tournament world, Kyung sat alone in his quarters looking out at the stars. He had come to this competition not to prove that humans were the strongest species, but to show that they could be trusted with power. They were not conquerors or destroyers. They were guardians who would sacrifice everything to protect not just their own people, but anyone who needed protection. Tomorrow would bring the final challenge, and with it the decision of which species would lead the Galactic Council. But tonight, Kyung just sat quietly and hoped that he would never have to use the terrible thing he carried. The soft beep of his daily tests seemed to echo longer than usual in the darkness, like a reminder of all the lives that depended on his restraint. The final challenge was not what anyone had expected. Instead of more combat or survival tests, the remaining competitors were brought to a massive chamber. Deep underground, representatives from every species in the known galaxy filled the space, creating a crowd so large it seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. Ancient beings that most people had only heard about in legends sat alongside modern species that had just discovered space travel. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all stood an elder, so old that nobody remembered what species it had originally belonged to. Its body seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, and when it spoke, every creature in the chamber felt the words directly in their mind instead of hearing them with their ears. The tournament was never really about combat or survival, the elder announced in a voice like distant thunder. We have watched each competitor not just to see how they fight, but to understand how they choose to use their power, how they treat others when they could easily harm them, how they face their deepest fears, how they behave when they believe nobody is watching. Kyung stood with the other finalists in the center of the vast chamber. Nala the Vorthan speedfighter was there along with Blix, the mollusk shapeshifter he had saved in the poison swamp. Surprisingly, the crystalline warrior had also advanced. Despite being paralyzed in their combat match, each fighter had proven themselves worthy through different kinds of strength. The elder continued speaking, and its words made several competitors shift nervously. The final test is simple. Each of you will be given the power to completely destroy one other species in this galaxy. You must choose which of your rivals will be eliminated from existence forever. The competitor who makes this choice most wisely will be declared the winner, and their species will lead the Galactic Council for the next 1,000 years. The chamber fell into absolute silence. This was not about fighting skills or survival abilities anymore. It was about making the hardest decision any living being could face: who deserved to live and who deserved to die. The weight of that choice would determine not just the winner of the tournament, but the future of galactic civilization. Nala spoke first. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the strain in it. With my speed and combat skills, I could choose to eliminate any species here, she said slowly. But if wisdom means I must commit murder, then I would rather remain foolish. I choose to destroy no one. Blix agreed, immediately changing its form to one that indicated solemn refusal. In mollusk culture, the shapeshifter had learned about mercy from Kyung during the Poison Swamp Challenge, and now chose to show that same mercy to others. The crystalline warrior surprised everyone by also refusing to make the deadly choice. Its people valued strength above all else, and most aliens expected it to eliminate the weakest species without hesitation. Instead, it spoke in the grinding stone voice of its kind. True strength is not measured by who you can destroy, but by who you choose to protect. All eyes turned to Kyung the human, who carried a device capable of ending all life in the galaxy. The man who had the actual means to destroy not just one species, but every living thing in the chamber. Everyone waited to see what the ultimate weapon would choose when given the power to use ultimate judgment. Kyung looked around the chamber at thousands of alien faces, representing millions of worlds and billions of lives. Each species had its own history, culture, dreams, and fears. Each one had fought and struggled and achieved great things in their own way. Who was he to decide which of them deserved to continue existing? He reached for the small device on his belt. Several security guards moved forward nervously, not sure whether they should try to stop him. The tension in the chamber became so thick it was hard to breathe as everyone watched the human handle his terrible weapon. Instead of activating the quantum destabilizer, Kyung carefully removed it from his belt and placed it on the floor in front of him. Then he stepped back and raised his empty hands so everyone could see them. I choose to destroy the weapon, he said in a voice that carried clearly through the vast chamber. Not any species, not any people, but the thing that makes destroying people possible. If having ultimate power means I must use it to kill, then I choose to have no power at all. The elder studied Kyung for a long moment that seemed to last forever. Then, incredibly, the ancient being smiled, an expression of light that filled the entire chamber with warmth. In all the eons of these tournaments, across thousands of competitions and millions of years, no competitor has ever understood the true test. The final challenge was not to choose who dies, the elder explained. It was to choose not to choose, to reject the power of life and death over others, to understand that true leadership comes not from the ability to destroy but from the wisdom to refuse destruction even when it would be easy. Kyung had won the tournament not through strength or speed or cunning, but through wisdom. Humanity would lead the Galactic Council not because they were the strongest species, but because they were willing to give up strength when that strength required them to harm others. As celebrations began throughout the galaxy with species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly talking about cooperation and peace, Kyung quietly picked up his device and reattached it to his belt. Several aliens noticed this and looked confused. I thought you destroyed the weapon, Nala said, approaching him with curiosity instead of fear. I destroyed its purpose, Kyung replied, but the responsibility remains there. May come a day when refusing to choose is not enough, when someone threatens not just one species but all life in the galaxy. On that day, one man will walk barefoot into the darkness and make the choice that no one else can make. He paused and looked up at the artificial sky above the chamber. But until that day comes, I will choose peace over power, mercy over victory, and hope over fear. Every day I will wake up and choose not to use this thing, and every day that choice will make the galaxy a little bit safer. The tournament was over, but Kyung's real job was just beginning. Somewhere among the stars, a quiet man in simple clothes would continue walking barefoot through the universe, carrying the power to end everything and using that power to protect everyone. He would serve as humanity's ambassador to the galaxy, showing through his actions that his species could be trusted with leadership, not because they were perfect, but because they understood their own imperfections. He would be a living reminder that the greatest strength was choosing not to use your strength. No weapons, no genetic modifications. Just one man, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the most important battle is the one you choose not to fight. The galaxy was in good hands, because those hands belonged to someone who would never use them to cause harm. The great chamber emptied, and representatives from 1,000 worlds began planning for a future of cooperation instead of conquest. Kyung stood alone, testing his device one final time. The soft beep echoed in the vast space like a promise that peace would be protected by someone who understood the true cost of war. The Barefoot Guardian was ready to begin his watch.